Namaste and welcome to the BAPS Better Living podcast. This is the Dharmic Life series where we talk about everyday moments and find a way to elevate them through spirituality so that we can experience greater peace, happiness, and joy. My name is Palak, and in this episode, we're going to explore how to live life in the 21st century and still stay rooted in timeless values that are centuries old, and also explore why those centuries-old values are still relevant today. This solid foundation provides stability and identity in an ever-changing world of dynamic culture, social pressures, and trends. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Akshara. I'm excited for our conversation today because I know you and I have grown up in very different spaces, but we've kind of landed in the same place, right? You born and raised in India. I was born and raised here in the United States, and our children have had completely different experiences from us. So do you mind telling us a little bit about your childhood and growing up in Mumbai as a practicing Hindu?
So yes, I was born and raised in Mumbai, a very metropolitan city. I had friends from many religions. Most of them were Hindus. With me practicing my Swaminarayan faith, I did not eat onion garlic, followed a strict vegetarian diet, no eggs, Ekadashi is the bi-weekly fast that we do. Not all my friends practiced that, so I felt a little bit self-conscious. And instead of compromising on those practices, I started hiding. So I would wear clothing that would hide my kanti. I would avoid social events on Ekadashi days. I would eat my lunch quickly before anyone could come so that I wouldn't have to explain. I just wanted to blend in with everyone. So at that time, it felt awkward and very heavy. But looking back, I see that those very practices quietly gave me roots, clarity about who I am, and an identity that stayed steady with me wherever I went.
I'm really surprised, honestly, because you grew up in India. I completely wouldn't expect that. But oddly enough, I also had a little bit of a similar experience when, growing up in the 80s and 90s, I really just wanted to fit in. I wanted to blend in. So at school, I was trying to just be more American, speaking English, not bringing Indian food in my lunchbox, things like that. But then at home is when I felt comfortable being Indian. We ate Indian food regularly, lived in an extended family. We would have a lot of our rituals and practices, our prayers. We had a small home mandir. And then going to mandir, it was a little extension of that, right? Finally, when I got to college, felt a little bit more comfortable because I was introduced to a larger Indian community. But at the same time, there was still something that was holding me back, right? So although I had plenty of friends, at the same time, though, they would go to the dining hall and my plate was very different, right? I had limited options because I was vegetarian. Their plates were full. I would wake up early on a Sunday morning to go to mandir and they're sleeping in. And so those experiences still made me feel a little self-conscious. I would probably say the place where I felt most myself was when I was at the mandir. Really only for the reason that the friends I had, I didn't have to explain myself to anymore, right? They were going through the same, I guess you could say, crisis of identity as I was. They were doing the same balancing act. Probably I was in my mid to late 20s by the time I finally felt comfortable in a singular identity, being a Hindu American, right? But by contrast, I see that my kids are growing up very differently, right? What I quietly held onto internally, they are much more rooted and comfortable in just being themselves.
I couldn't agree more. Seeing my kids so sure about their identity, so comfortable with who they are, fills me with pride. They are very comfortable asking for eggless desserts, wearing their chandlo to school, something that I only started until my mid-30s. Even today, when my chandlo size changes according to the meeting I'm walking into. And my older one will point out that, Mom, why is your chandlo smaller today? But she, on the other hand, is very comfortable explaining Her love for mandir, her chandlo, her dietary restrictions to her friends confidently. She's even invited her friends and teachers to mandir, and they've come. We've hosted them to mandir. Even my younger 4-year-old wears his tilak chandlo to mandir confidently, explains what it is, saying that this is of God, and he will ask for snacks without gelatin, without eggs. Watching them makes me realize that once I tried to hide, our children are holding with pride.
I know, right? I mean, these kids, there's something that, we were raised the same way with the same values, but there's just a confidence that they go out there with, right? Like, just like you said about your kids, mine also, they've been wearing their chanlos since elementary school, whereas I didn't start probably till I was about 30 years old. And my younger one, he even invited his teacher to see like an exhibition we had. He invited his teacher to a program that he was in, even during like Diwali, to see the Ankut and New Year's celebrations. So there's really something different about how, I don't know if it's different about how they're being raised, or I don't know if it's different about in how they've internalized the things that they've learned and the teachings that they've been exposed to. But whatever it is, I do think it's 100% on the right path, right? I wouldn't replace it for anything.
And it didn't happen overnight. So before we moved to Robbinsville, New Jersey, we were in Connecticut. Mandir was an hour away. And mandir was something which was planned, intentional, something we went to. Once we moved here in Robbinsville, closer to mandir, it just became a part of our lives. We could witness closely the aartis, the festivals being celebrated, come on the weekdays for a quiet darshan. So the values and the morals we were teaching kids at home, kind of they saw them come alive. The kids saw how the community, the devotion, everything was woven together, the seva, the volunteerism. They saw everything firsthand, and mandir became familiar and natural. It wasn't just the Sunday assembly. It was a part of their lives. As for me, it grounded our family rhythm. Life still moves fast, but mandir just gives us a steady center.
So I think what you say, in regards to mandir and the impact being close by has had on you and your family, I do think it stands true for any faith, any house of worship, right? Because what it's about is the physical space. We certainly, impart values and morals and a lot of these character education pieces at home, definitely, right? But there's something to be said for having a physical place to be able to go where that's the sole purpose. Right? You're not bogged down by all the other details and the happenings of daily life, right? That's where you go and you learn and you focus on these values and these stories, because the whole idea is to internalize it so it can carry you through life. Personally, I can say that, a lot of my friends, I'm still friends with many of my childhood friends growing up, and there are various faiths, as well as a lot of the visitors I encounter here at the Robbinsville, the Swaminarayan Akshardham. But the one common thread that a lot of people do tend to share, that I've heard over and over, is that, their upbringing, if they attended like a Sunday school or any sort of like classes when they were younger at their house of worship, even if they may or may not still attend today, those lessons and those teachings, they've stayed with them. One way or another. And it's always shared that like it impacts them one way or another as well, right? So I think the one thing is that it's universal, right? A little bit of that experience you had, but it's universal that these things that we learn when we're growing up, even from childhood or any point that we take that on in life to focus on our personal growth or, our own character education and how we can apply that in our daily living. I think those are universal things that work regardless, right, of who you are, where you are. And so clearly for both of us, mandir has been central to that experience. But at the same time, I would imagine there are other parts of your upbringing that have kind of led to you feeling grounded today in who you are. So can you tell me a little bit?
Mandir was the central to my upbringing, to my life. But I realized that wasn't the only thing that shaped my spiritual compass. What really formed my identity was the lived experiences around me. growing up around friends and families who practice the similar values, watching our festivals not just as mere events, but acts of spirituality, acts of devotion, being a part of a community where spirituality wasn't just theory, it was practiced, modeled, and lived through day to day life. So that gave me a true sense of dharma, not just a rule book, but the way of life, the way life is lived. And one experience growing up that stays with me is volunteering at Amrut Mahotsav, Pramukh Swami Maharaj's 75th birthday celebration. I was only 10 years old at that time, but I was a tour guide and spent 60 days out there just volunteering.
Oh, I love that. So what exactly did you do, right? So you said this was in India, and I remember hearing about it, but I wasn't able to attend, right? So as a 10-year-old, what could you possibly volunteer as?
Right. So, like I said, I was a tour guide for the guests in the Bal Nagari. And Bal Nagari was this magical, amazing world where everything was for children. From the entrance, which was a 60-foot tall gate with all kinds of animals welcoming you inside, to every corner of Bal Nagari, everything was run and described by kids, the children volunteers themselves. There was a kids experience, an exhibition showing kids what was the right and the wrong, simple truths about life, like not to steal, say the truth, but it was displayed so nicely in the exhibits. There was a handicraft place where kids themselves made stuff and sold their items. So there was also a parents' pavilion where the parents were taught basic parenting stuff in a very practical way. And then there was an open stage. So kids performed plays, dramas, which were very relevant social causes. So my seva was to guide guests around Bal Nagari, and that filled me with so much pride. One thing that stays even today is my school's trustee was there with his family, and I took him around explaining my beliefs, my world to him, and they were so happy about it.
That sounds like a huge responsibility for a 10-year-old. So I can only imagine, though, how do you even know what to say, right? I mean, you had to have some sort of training because at 10 years old, how much knowledge do you really have about, anything that's in the exhibition or whatever these like values and lessons? I mean, we're still figuring it out as adults. So what prepared you for it?
So Amrit Mahotsav for me was a 60-day experience. The Mahotsav was for 30 days. And the rest of the 30 days prior to Amrit Mahotsav, we were in a central location. We were all together, all youths, all kids, and we were kind of explained the concepts in a very playful, fun manner. We had our teacher volunteers who would explain everything, who would tell us stories along with it. So it wasn't just memorization. It was about personally connecting with the teachings so I could explain them clearly and meaningfully to others.
So clearly this was a huge experience, right? I mean, it sounds like such a great opportunity. I can't imagine many 10-year-olds really being able to do something like that, right? How would you say that it impacted who you are today?
I was a 10-year-old. It wasn't, understanding the values so much as it all came very naturally. We were taught that this is right, this is wrong. These are the stories. So I would go explain the stories, tell them, you shouldn't steal, you should always say the truth, you should bow down to your parents. And these things seemed very natural and something which was kind of needed to be there. But when the guests left, they left very impressed. They were really clearly impacted by it. And that made me pause and think that, wow, these values are something which should be upheld. Those should be with me. So the seva of the guide wasn't to guide others, it kind of guided me. It strengthened my inner compass, shaping the way I live, make choices, and express my values authentically to this day.
The thing about having to teach others is you really have to know what you're talking about, right? And not in a way that it's just jargon, it's just terminology, but you have to internalize it. At the same time, though, I can only imagine it forces you to clarify your beliefs, validate whatever it is that you're trying to explain, question, okay, why do I do this practice? Or who am I really? It's definitely not an easy thing. I can only probably imagine that this experience really strengthened your internal compass.
Maintaining that internal compass in that atmosphere was easy. I was surrounded by everyone practicing my beliefs, my values. But holding on to your internal compass in all circumstances, that's when the real challenge sets in. A perfect story that comes to my mind is of Bhakta Prahlad from the Bhagavad Purans, our ancient Hindu texts. Prahlad was born into a family where power and ego were dominant. Even his own father told him not to believe in God, but everyone in the kingdom should believe in the Father. Yet he did not stop his beliefs in God and his practices about worshipping God. He faced threats, punishments, and even fire when his aunt Holika tried to harm him. But his faith, his dharma, and his inner compass kept him steadfast. In the end, Bhagwan Sri Vishnu took the Narsimha avatar, came to protect him, upholding dharma and truth.
Learning more about these types of stories, like you shared about Bhakta Prahlad, that exist within our scriptures, that goes a long way in helping solidify that internal compass within us, right? That refinement of knowledge, that continued learning. It's a form of sadhana, an act on our spiritual journey. And the more we engage in that, the easier it is to be confident in who you are and all the decisions that you make on a daily basis, that you know what you're doing is right or wrong. It's something that we think oftentimes is objective, but it's really not, right? It really comes from what we have gained over the years, from our experiences, from talking to others, from our scriptures, from these stories and lessons that we're immersed in, not only by reading it or perhaps listening to it, but by actually following it in example, seeing it in others. But to be quite honest, the one thing that I think that it gives you or provides us that I was probably missing in my childhood was asmita, or a sense of pride, right? I was never embarrassed. It's not that I was embarrassed about being Hindu. It's not that I was embarrassed about being Indian, because I was very happy and comfortable in my skin in the right spaces. But that idea of asmita and being proud of who you are and where you come from, it doesn't happen naturally. It happens with the more you know and the more you live these experiences. So I'd imagine you spoke a lot about, your internal compass, the things that impacted your upbringing in a positive way. But now you and your husband with your family, I can only assume that there are very conscious decisions and intentional actions that you kind of take within your household to nurture and build that asmita, or that pride, within your family now.
So, in today's world, it is very important to have a strong footing in who we are. Dharma teaches us to stay rooted in our values, to have an identity, to have pride, to have asmita in our culture, and always be ourselves. I see that clarity, courage, and pride already shining in our kids, and it's something I deeply hope and pray that they maintain as they grow, continuing to live their Hindu American identity with confidence, devotion, and joy.
But as much as we teach them, as much as we impart on them, the real question is, how do you know they have pride in it now?
Mandir is central to us, but we've learned and experienced that sanskars, morals and values, the spiritual values, are built at home. Not by major things, but small things like celebrating our Guru and Bhagwan's birthday at home. We bake cakes, decorate our house. During Raksha Bandhan, the brother and sister get together, make simple sweets for each other. Diwali, we go all out. We decorate the house with diyas. The entire house has torans around it. We do the Lakshmi Pujan, Saraswati Pujan at home first and then at Mandir. And then we tell the stories behind it, read books, tell the kids the historical reference, why everything is done. In Chopra Pujan, we make sure that their school books are there. so that they know that knowledge is sacred and they become a part of those activities too.
Knowing the why really makes a big difference, right? It changes from just doing something mechanically to actually feeling connected to it. And I think that's the great thing about these traditions, right? Around our festivals, our holidays. And they're not always religious traditions. Sometimes they're just family traditions. But it brings out that excitement for sure. And it always keeps you connected to how you grew up, to your family, or even maybe even something that, generations before you practiced. It still makes me curious though. Akshara, how do you know? What do you see in your children that gives you that confidence that you're on the right path and you're doing the right things? And these things, these practices that you're keeping in your home actually are leaving some kind of lasting impression.
So I can tell you something that happened this year. I was explaining to both of my kids that before Dhanteras, we should clean our house, make our house welcoming, so that Lakshmi ji actually comes to our puja. And then I told them to clean their toy room. I go up to finish up chores and I come down and I see the toy room is very clean. But there is a bottle of water, there are some chocolates, and then Maharaj's jewelry is out and put for Lakshmi ji. The kids just felt that it was the right way to start and celebrate the puja. And that's how I am able to see the impact. It makes me realize that Asmita grows not through instructions, but through lived experience. When bhakti is joyful and consistent, pride in our Hindu and Swaminarayan identity naturally follows.
I love that. I love that you're actually able to see it visible, because that's when you see it, that's when you know, right? One other thing though is 100%. The lived experiences is what kind of keeps you connected and brings us joy. At the same time, though, outside of some of these like rituals and these traditions, there's something to be said for knowledge, understanding the why behind why we do something. Because oftentimes, without knowing that, that's when it doesn't continue in the next generation. That's when, like later in life, you sort of lose your footing, or you lose like your sense of confidence when you are actually like engaging in some of like our practices. So, I remember you had shared when you moved a couple of years ago, one experience you had with the Amazon delivery driver. And that absolutely comes to mind right now when I'm talking about like knowing the reason for certain either practices or rituals or symbols. Can you just tell that story again?
So it was during Diwali time. And like every year, I had just kind of cleaned the porch and done the swastikas outside. So Amazon just leaves their packages and goes. But this time they rang the bell and waited. So I go down, I open the door, and I see the delivery driver visibly disturbed. And she just asked me, like, why do you have the Nazi symbol outside? Oh. And I was taken aback. I didn't know what to answer immediately. But I told her that it wasn't that, and it was just our Hindu sacred symbol. And that's all I could say at that time. And she went away. But it got me thinking that I know it's a sacred symbol, but I don't know much to it. So that night, I made my daughter sit. We both kind of researched, read more about the swastik. And it turns out that it has so much more meaning than just something that we do. The swastik comes from the swastika comes from a Sanskrit word which means su, meaning good, and astik, meaning to exist. So swastika means prosperity, devotion. It means for good energy to actually exist. And that experience really reinforced what you were saying. When we understand the meaning behind our practices, everything changes. Traditions stop feeling outdated and mechanical. They start to feel intentional and lived. Now, when we do the swastika, my daughter and I both understand the meaning. And we know that we are inviting good energy into our house. It is an act of devotion, and it is a pure symbol, our sacred symbol.
I feel like the same can be said in positive celebratory circumstances. You said like when you understand the meaning behind something. And at the same time, I think it helps significantly even in times of difficulty. So about 2 years ago, my father-in-law passed away, and it was the first time that my kids experienced the death of anybody in their immediate family and their first grandparent. And so that's heavy. It's heavy for kids, it's heavy for adults as well. But since they're, I guess you can say, very curious children, and they're used to always knowing the reason why, because it's just a practice in our house, right? If we're going to do something, you should know the significance of it or why behind it. And so naturally, throughout, the several different days and the different rituals we have, from like a pratna sabha, people coming to our home, the actual puja vidhi at the funeral, even, we wash and prepare the body. Each step of the way, they wanted to know why. Why do we do this? Because otherwise it just seems like these random acts and they're not connected by anything. And surprisingly, what I thought would be very emotional, and it certainly was emotional for them, but them asking these questions and knowing why, like you can almost see that they're like thinking about it throughout the process. And what would have been an extremely emotional circumstance, they definitely were grieving still. They had the grief, but knowing and understanding the way we practice certain rites and rituals, it almost lightened the load. And you can just kind of see that, there was like sadness there because you have that love and that human connection, but there was almost like a maturity, like okay, it's okay, right? We said goodbye in the way we need to say goodbye. They felt satisfied that all of these things that they engaged in, it had some sort of meaning. And it wasn't just like random acts, but it almost gave them a sort of comfort, I guess you can say.
They gave us clarity, peace, and confidence to live fully in this modern world while remaining deeply rooted in our values.
Living in the 21st century doesn't require us to abandon our values. It actually requires us anchoring in them. While the world is constantly shifting, because we know it's always changing, spirituality is what keeps us steady. So when it comes to choosing right or wrong, when it comes to knowing who you are, as long as we impart these teachings and these lessons that we've learned throughout our lives that have really formed our sense of self, then we'll have no problem moving forward in our daily lives. What we've explored today, Dharma and Asmita, it's not abstract philosophy. It's lived wisdom. It shows up in how we raise confident children, how we navigate challenges without losing ourselves, how we celebrate with meaning, and even how we remain peaceful when life doesn't go according to our plan. When values are rooted in faith and supported by community, reinforced through practice, they don't limit us, they liberate us. This is the quiet strength of a spiritual life. Clarity in the confusion, joy without excess, and identity without insecurity. When our foundation is strong, the world can change around us, but we remain grounded within. Thank you for joining me today, Akshara, and thank you to our listeners as well. Until next time, namaste.